Hi, I'm Morndas, and welcome back to The Prince and the Paper, where I stand here, talk about books, and try to validate my English degree. This month we'll be analyzing the Old English epic, Beowulf, by some monk probably. Even though the author of Beowulf is a total mystery, this epic poem is one of the oldest and most important works of English literature. Plus, it's every fantasy nerd's dream. We've got quests, we've got a dragon, we've got some dude wrestling a goblin troll thing with his bare hands. Or as I like to call it, Tuesday night. So grab your battle axes and come along as we study this tale of heroism, brotherhood, and enough mead to get your head spinning. The story of Beowulf is told in the past tense by an unidentified narrator. It's actually very likely that the narrator is intended to be the voice of a now Christianized region looking back on pagan times, and the epic's many biblical mentions support this theory. However, the narrator does remain fairly objective, providing insights to the distant past as well as predictions for the future. In terms of location, Beowulf takes place in pre-medieval Scandinavia, otherwise known as the OG Skyrim. But let's be honest, guys. Skyrim wants what Beowulf has. Beowulf and his squad hail from a region called Geatland, or southern Sweden, but a good chunk of the epic takes place in Denmark. As far as time goes, we can assume from the text and the history of oral tradition that the events of Beowulf happened sometime in the 5th or 6th century, a time period in which courage, honor, and the Germanic code of heroism outshone everything else. There are quite a few characters in Beowulf, many of whom have names that look kind of like a key smash. Egtho, Eggethau, Egg Salad. Lucky for us, the most important characters have names that don't sound like a spell from Aragon. Let's start with our protagonist and titular character, Beowulf. Beowulf is a fascinating protagonist because we see him embody two completely different models of Germanic virtue. In his youth, he's the perfect hero. Through his respective battles with Grendel and Grendel's mother, he exemplifies strength, courage, and loyalty, and ultimately solidifies his reputation. In the second part of the story, we see Beowulf at the end of his life, having ruled over Geatland for many years as a strong and reliable king. However, it's important to note that his loyalty to the throne's rightful heir is why he ends up attaining kingship at all. He never rushes the throne for himself as our old friend Julius Caesar did, and we all remember what happened to him. Through these two very different parts of Beowulf's life, we see how the responsibilities of a king acting for the good of others greatly differ from those of a warrior seeking personal glory. And Beowulf is unique because despite the circumstances of his death, it's clear that he managed to embody both the perfect hero and the wise, benevolent ruler. Of course, he had a lot of guidance from our next character, King Hrothgar. Hrothgar is the ruler of the Danes. He's not Beowulf's king, but nonetheless acts as a mentor to our young hero. Unlike Beowulf, Hrothgar is static. He is a source of stability, and his ruminations upon heroism greatly influence Beowulf's development. He provides a stern warning against pride, and his attitudes toward power and leadership are aired on the side of caution. Hrothgar serves as a reminder to Beowulf that there is a strong difference between being a valiant hero and a noble king. And without this warning, Beowulf could have turned into a far different person and an even more different ruler, if he ended up ruling at all. Our last main character is less of a character and more of a gross monster, but he still holds great importance to the plot. I am, of course, talking about Grendel, the first of the three monsters that Beowulf fights throughout the epic. It's interesting because while we as readers are meant to view Grendel as this vicious creature, there are a few moments where the author might be trying to humanize our resident goblin. The author describes Grendel as an exile, or someone who's been outcasted from society, and also identifies him as a descendant of Cain, a biblical figure who embodies resentment and anger. These are two human emotions that make up the root of Grendel's thirst for revenge against the Danes. However, the author also states that Grendel is inherently malicious and has never shown remorse for his actions, which in turn makes his ostracism justifiable. My interpretation of Grendel is that he is a villain, descended from a villain, who was outcasted from society for looking and acting like a villain, and seeks reinstatement by killing and eating people.
Oh, boo-hoo! Let let me play a sad song for you on the world's smallest violin.
Maybe he's just mad because he has to live in his mom's basement. However you interpret Grendel, sympathetic or not, the most important thing about him is who he is in relation to Beowulf, a seemingly invincible being of darkness and retribution brought down by a man who embodies heroism and light. Beowulf practically invented this trope. That's right. Some rando who probably had fleas basically created the trope that would define books like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings. As always, I absolutely recommend further analysis into all three of these characters, particularly Grendel, and don't forget to pay attention to how minor characters like Unferth, Wiglaf, and Grendel's mom influence Beowulf's growth. You could argue that the overarching theme of Beowulf is a number of things. The heroic code, loyalty, good versus evil, even revenge, but I think that all of these ideas are connected to one very simple theme: identity. As I said earlier, this is a time in which one's character is absolutely everything. Your lineage, deeds, and sense of honor, or lack thereof, make up who you are, and in turn determine how the world remembers you. Another way to think of this is the importance of building a good reputation. In Beowulf's time, that pretty much meant performing acts of bravery in order to establish yourself as a great warrior and hero. If you were a nobleman, this meant establishing yourself as a good ruler, which, as we just discussed, has a divergent set of responsibilities from that of a warrior. It is Beowulf's embodiment of both of these paths and the emphasis on their challenges and differences that truly make identity central to the poem. Identity also comes forth in characters like Unferth, a lesser warrior meant to foil Beowulf's greatness. Unferth is jealous and angry because he knows he won't be remembered in the same way that Beowulf will. He's like a second-string quarterback. We even see identity come forth in Grendel's status as a descendant of Cain. His identity is the root cause of his expulsion from society and a huge source of conflict in the poem. Well, that and him just straight up eating people. There's also a strong emphasis on the comitatus, or the bond between freemen and lords. I've also heard this term used when speaking of the brotherly kinship between warriors. It's a term that means honor, friendship, and respect. So, whether you were a great warrior, a wise ruler, a villainous monster, or none of the above, your actions, principles, and adherence to the heroic code would ultimately determine how your name would be remembered for the rest of time, or if your name was remembered at all. I love the symbols in Beowulf because instead of like a hat or a weird omen, we get stuff like monster arms and mead halls. Hrothgar's mead hall, Heorot, is actually a pretty important one, even though it's basically the pre-medieval equivalent of a Buffalo Wild Wings. Heorot is in many ways the center of the poem. It's the place where the Danes and the Geats go to eat good food, drink, play games, fight each other. Maybe it's more like a Chuck E. Cheese. Either way, Heorot and mead halls in general are symbols of kinship and power. They're places where kings can hold court and warriors can strengthen their bonds with one another by getting plastered. Interestingly, the word Heorot would translate to something like Hall of the Hart, or stag. Since the hart is considered an animal of prey, we could see this as a jibe at the fact that Grendel has been coming and killing the inhabitants as if they were prey as opposed to fierce warriors. Speaking of Grendel, the arm that Beowulf rips off and keeps as a trophy is also a pretty major symbol. For the people of Heorot, the arm represents triumph and the victory of good over evil. But for Grendel's mother, the arm is a symbol of grief and anger, prompting her to attack the mead hall, just when you thought it was all over.
I just cleaned up this mess. Keep it clean for 10 minutes.
Our last important symbol is Beowulf's final opponent, the dragon. Dragons are always fun because depending on what you're reading, watching, or playing, dragons have different attitudes, purposes, and levels of importance. In some stories, dragons are vicious enemies designed to be slain by the hero. In others, dragons are powerful allies, maybe even worshipped. And if you're playing D&D, dragons are probably the reason your party got TPK'd.
Don't ever kill your players. Let them kill themselves.
In Beowulf, the dragon is meant to symbolize the pinnacle of evil. Through its massive hoard of gold, it displays greed, and its malevolent nature would spell destruction for Beowulf's people. The dragon is, in many ways, a foil to Beowulf. Where the dragon shows greed, Beowulf shows generosity. Where the dragon is violent through the killing of innocents, Beowulf is valiant through the destruction of monsters. This is Beowulf's final stand against evil. He knows that to fight could mean his death, but to let the dragon roam free would destroy all that he had built. Some folks interpret this scene as a selfish act, Beowulf acting out on his youthful impulses despite his old age and consequently dying. A totally valid analysis. I personally view this scene as the final marrying of Beowulf's identity as a warrior and a king. He displays a warrior's bravery and heroism by going after the dragon, but a king's regard for the well-being of others by doing so in spite of the fact that he knows it could spell his death. So although both die in this scene, the ultimate sacrifice against evil has been made. So please, share with me your thoughts on Beowulf from mead halls to monsters. And if you have any questions or different interpretations, let me know in the comments or find me on Twitter. I'm Morndas, and this has been The Prince and the Paper. See you next time.